Jamie O'Rourke and the Big Potato. Jamie O'Rourke was the laziest man in all of Ireland. He would do anything to avoid working, especially if it had to do with growing potatoes. Jamie O'Rourke, his wife Eileen, would say, "We'll have nothing to eat this winter if you don't go out and dig up the potatoes." "Oh, the saints preserve us," Jamie would whine. "Me back is as sore as it can be. Sure as I'm telling you, wife, you'll have to dig them up yourself. I'll break in two if I so much as get out of this bed." So Eileen, who had done all the planting and watering and weeding anyhow, would go out to the tiny garden and dig up the smallest potatoes in Ireland, all because her husband was too lazy to dig a bigger garden and had no money to buy good seed. Then poor Eileen wrenched her back and was laid up in bed. Saint Bridget and the Virgin Mary herself must have smiled down on Eileen O'Rourke, the village woman said. "Well, it's the first rest she's had since she married Jamie O'Rourke." With Eileen in bed, Jamie began to worry. No Eileen to dig meant no potatoes all winter, and no potatoes meant no food. "Oh, poor me," whined Jamie. "I'll starve to death. I'd best go to church and confess to Father O'Malley. There's no telling how soon old Death will be knocking at my door." So even though it was midnight, Jamie set out for church. He was about halfway down the hill when he heard singing and a tap-tap-tapping sound. "Sure as I wouldn't be knowing," Jamie whispered, "but I swear it's a leprechaun." And sure enough, sitting in a circle of ferns in the moonlight was a leprechaun, singing and hammering tiny nails into heels of fairy boots he was making. Jamie knew just what to do. He crept up and grabbed the little man by his coattails and held on to him. Let me go, the leprechaun shouted. "Not on your life," Jamie said. "Not until you show me where you keep your pot of gold." Now, everyone in Ireland knows that leprechauns make boots and dancing shoes for the fairies who pay them in gold. And everyone knows that if you catch a leprechaun, he'll pay for his freedom with his pot of gold. But this leprechaun was more clever than most. "Oh, please, Mr. Mortal Man," he pleaded. "I'm just starting out making fairy shoes, and I only have 1 or 2 pieces of gold in my pot. Won't you take a wish instead?" "Well, why would I want a wish for?" Jamie said. "Me's about to die of starvation, my wife is sick in bed, can't dig up the potatoes for the winter, and they say such puny potatoes anyway." "Well," said the leprechaun, reaching into his pocket, "you could wish for the biggest potato in the world, and it would last you all winter, and you wouldn't have to do anything more than plant this seed and water it and wait." That sounded wonderful to Jamie. "Done," he shouted. And as the leprechaun dropped the seed into Jamie's hand, Jamie let go of his coattails, and off the leprechaun scampered. When Eileen heard what he had done, she was furious. "Jamie O'Rourke, you're not only the laziest man in Ireland, but a fool as well. Giving up a pot of gold for a potato seed? Well, I'm going out to plant this seed and water it, and you'll see," said Jamie. And out he went. And faith, Eileen did see. In no time at all, the biggest, finest potato plant had sprouted out of the ground, followed by a potato itself. It was so big that it pushed up not only all the dirt in the garden, but the garden shed and the corner of the cottage as well. "Well, surely now we're going to have to dig it up," Jamie said proudly. He hoed and he hoed all around it, but it wouldn't dig that potato out of the ground. He got a beam and a rock and tried to pry it. He pushed, but it wouldn't budge. All as he was pondering, a neighbor passed by on his way to the village. He couldn't believe his eyes. He had never seen anybody in such a big potato. Well, what he had seen before. And you know, the hill up to Jamie's house was filled with villagers coming to see a big potato. "Where did it come from?" they shouted. Jamie told them all about his lucky night that he caught the leprechaun and how smart he had been. Why would anyone have gotten a pot of gold? But he bragged he got the biggest potato in the world, and that took some doing. However did you outsmart a leprechaun, they all asked, and once Jamie hesitated and scratched his head, well, we'll help you dig up the potato, and I'll tell you how I got it. And they all grabbed shovels and hoes, and they all started to dig. And they dug, and they dug, and they pushed, and they shoved, until that potato flew up out of its hole, and it rolled down the hill faster and faster until it reached the bottom, where it bounced high and came to a stop, wedged between the stone walls and the other side of the road. What do we do now? So the villagers sawed and chopped all the corners and pieces that Jamie sat on the stone, and he watched. And all winter long, everyone had potatoes to eat and eat and eat until no one wanted or hear of another potato again. And in the spring, Jamie said, I saved a potato eye for the seed, just in case we're about to plant it. Oh no, the villagers cried. If you promise not to plant that seed, Jamie, we'll promise before St. Patrick's and all the saints to see that you and Eileen always have plenty to cook and eat. We don't want another giant potato around here. And Jamie smiled and agreed. What a perfect life for a lazy man. And so you see, darling Eileen, Jamie told her, I wasn't such a fool with that leprechaun after all. And Eileen had to admit that Jamie O'Rourke was right.